Hello. If somebody could indicate to me whether I'm live or not working, I would appreciate that. And again, if you have I'll take some time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, please put those in all caps question and then what your question is, and I'll try to keep this on track. Okay, everything sounds good. So I have been playing with a different setup, just so a little by way of explanation. And it's a little bit different. So I spent all morning in my office setting things up. And of course, my office is more of a mess now than it was when I started. So I'm going to go through a few things tonight, and we will, let me get my slides here. I'm going to try to stay on just a couple of topics. I could go on for quite a bit. So let me maybe tell you what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to spend too much time. Well, I'll talk about it in just a minute because there's been one development I think that's important with regard to things that are sort of related to President Biden's biotechnology executive order, which has now been published in the public record. But I'll get to that in just a moment. So let me go over a couple of these things here. Just excuse me one second. So here is this sort of an update on what's going on in Abu Dhabi. If you'll remember, back in early 2019, Pope Francis went to Abu Dhabi and he signed this document on the human fraternity. He did that with the head of the Al-Azhar University, which is the highest, most prestigious Sunni Islamic institution in the world. It's located in Cairo, Egypt. If you remember back in 2009, 10 years before that, on his first major foreign trip, President Obama had gone to Turkey, then to Cairo, and it was essentially an apology tour for the, America, at least this American president was apologizing to the Muslim world. So fast forward to 2019, Pope Francis went to Abu Dhabi and he signed a document with the president or the head of Al-Azhar University in Cairo. And essentially it was to celebrate the unity of the Abrahamic faith. So there's been a number of developments along that line. So Abu Dhabi, which is one of the sheikh, there's a separate sheikh for Abu Dhabi, there's a separate sheikh for Dubai. Head of Abu Dhabi is the president of the United Arab Emirates, which is one of the signatories to the Abraham Accords. The plan was to build what they call the Abraham family house in Abu Dhabi. That has been under construction. I don't have the updated pictures, but you can find them out there. And I talked about this about a month. I think it was back in July to the progress. And then a few weeks ago, I updated you that the construction was to be completed and they're going to celebrate the opening with a symphony called Unity of Three, interestingly enough. And this, they're going to dedicate this Abraham family house, which consists of three different worship centers: a mosque, a Christian church, Catholic church, and a Jewish synagogue. It's interesting that this theme of the Abraham family house has also been carried over to a number of different areas. For example, in Omaha, Nebraska, there is a church, a synagogue, and a mosque in one area. And I think it's along Devil's Creek, interestingly enough. I think that's the name of the creek. There's also under construction on Museum Island in Berlin is the House of One, where they're going to celebrate these three so these three religions. They're all united because they all have Abraham as their founder. Then, so this house in Dubai is supposed to open up in October. And then here was this tweet from the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity that the document on human fraternity, the one that had been signed back in 2019, was adopted at the 7th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions in Kazakhstan, which is kind of interesting because if you look at the title or the capital of Kazakhstan, it has a very New Age look to it. A lot of very strange buildings, and I think it used to be called Astana, but it's now named after one of the most recent rulers of Kazakhstan. But it's a very strange looking city, and they have a lot of international conferences and meetings and that sort of thing. So just understand that that's going on. The other thing that's going on, for example, here's an article. This is from back in August, that France was bracing for catastrophic food shortages following drought. Farmers and unions warn. And I have to tell you that as I've been tracking this, there are a lot of places around the world that have been suffering from severe drought that's affecting crop production. Now, it's not likely that it's going to show up in the stores and the food supply in this right now because, the way the food system works. But I think next year is going to be pretty rough. That same concern, by the way, would also apply to gas supplies. So, for example, we know that Russia has cut back, if not cut off, supplying gas to Europe. Now, what Europe would be doing at this time of year is they would be filling their reserves so that they would have enough to get through the winter when there is more of a demand for gas. And the amount of gas coming through the pipelines may not be sufficient to supply all the gas that's needed for power and heat and that sort of thing in Europe, particularly in Germany. But where you're going to see the big impact in Germany, I think it's going to be a very difficult winter for Europe unless something changes dramatically. And as I'll talk about in a moment, I think things are going the opposite direction. So this year they've been filling their reserves, and they do have the reserves filled up, but not at the usual percentage. But there is enough there that if they conserve, and the way they'll conserve is factories won't operate, people will have to keep their houses at a lower temperature. For example, Switzerland has been toying with, or maybe has actually enacted, rules or laws that if you put your temperature above 66, you could go to prison for 3 years. But next year, when they don't have, if the supply of gas from Russia does not come back, next year they won't be able to fill up their gas reserves. And so the following winter will be even more difficult than this winter, and there's a cascading effect. But there's also a cascading effect because the plants are shutting down in many instances. Smelters, aluminum, iron, that sort of thing. Well, that has a ripple effect because you need aluminum to make your cars, you need aluminum for cans for beverages, and there's just this cascading effect that's going to roll through the economy. And some people are thinking that this could go on for 3 to 5 years. So I would not take a lot of comfort right now that things seem to be kind of okay, other than prices are going up. I saw something that I like at the store. It's usually $28. Now it's $30. And you see that all the time. So prices are going up. And I just don't see that changing, regardless of what President Biden tries to say that, inflation hasn't gotten worse, so he's doing a great job, or something ridiculous like that. But there is just, again, a a cascading effect that's going to happen. I see I didn't share my screen. So, okay. Here is the tweet on the human fraternity that I did not share. Right, let me see if I can do this. Yeah, that's a little bit better. You don't need to see me. So, so that's fraternity. Here's the article on Germany, or I'm sorry, on France with a drought. There's drought in the United States. Corn crop production in the United States is significantly lower. And even if it's 10% lower, that's going to have a huge impact because corn is used in so many things. Wheat is used in so many things. Soy is used in so many things. So crops in some areas are going to be bumper crops. I heard North Dakota is going to have a bumper wheat crop this year, which is good. But a lot of the wheat from Russia, a lot of the wheat from Ukraine is still sort of locked up and not getting to market that quickly. It's going to have a huge impact in the third world. It's particularly going to have a huge impact in the third world, developing nations, because the developed nations will print money so they can buy it. Even though they don't really have the money, they'll just print money to buy it. And there could be, I mean, there are serious concerns that there could be 100 million people in the developing nations of the world that could starve to death over the next year. I mean, this is very apocalyptic stuff. I was reading a report that was put out by the UN, one of the UN agencies that surveys Syria. And in Syria, Syria used to produce about 4 million tons of wheat per year. That was enough to feed for all the wheat needs of Syria. But back in the late 2000s, they had a several-year drought. Wheat production dropped. Then, of course, that was one of the factors that led to the Syrian civil war and the riots that took place. And the result was Syria, which is a country of 22 million people. About 11 million people in Syria, over half of the population from 2011, does not live where they lived in 2011. About a quarter have been internally displaced, and about a quarter have completely left the country. And then that puts impact on countries like Lebanon, which has 1.5 million Syrian refugees in a country where they only have a 4 million population. There's about maybe 2 million in Jordan, where they only have about a 5 or 6 million population. And then Turkey, of course, it has 85 million people, but they have about 3.5 million refugees. So there's a cascading effect. But the other point of this is that the lack of wheat production in Syria led to the Syrian civil war. It's led to all kinds of turmoil. So take that problem in Syria, not having enough food, and expand it out to a bunch of other countries. Egypt is dependent for well above 50% of its wheat comes from imports. And most of that, I think 90% of that came from Ukraine. This is not going to work out well. There's just no way to kind of put Band-Aids on this. So here in the United States, we'll probably not notice it as much, but there are plenty of reasons why you should be concerned in preparing and that sort of thing. So, let me go on here to my next slide. Again, this is the gas problem in Europe. I don't see how that's going to work. Prices are going down a little bit, but part of that is because they've been putting stuff in storage, and I just don't see it working out well. I was listening to someone else on another channel talking about a trip that they took. I think they went to England. And when they got to England, there was no heat in the hotel. There was no internet, and there was no central heating, and there was no hot water at a hotel. And this was a fairly highly rated hotel. And the person asked the manager, and he says, "I just can't make it. Utility costs have gone up so much. I'm only making it. I'm only surviving and staying out of bankruptcy because I have wedding parties booked at the hotel. But if those go away, the hotel will go into bankruptcy." So you're going to see just this cascade of a lot of different things. So I see your questions. I'm going to try to go back to those. Here, this is related to the Biden biotechnology executive order that was published on September 12th. And then they also had a big White House summit about that. This is transhumanism and technocracy on steroids. And the thing in the biotechnology executive order of Biden is that they're going to do everything, and they're talking about programming, reprogramming, rewriting the software for DNA and cells and all sorts of things. This is transhumanism on an epic scale. And don't lose sight of the fact that this transhumanism thing that's being pushed, this transgender thing that's being pushed in the schools is not related to the transhumanism. It's to soften everybody up so that, you're going to accept different things or a different definition of what it means to be human. If you're going to accept a different definition of whether you're a boy or girl, and you're going to turn that into whatever it is, 47 or 57 genders, you can see that they're softening people up. And they're also engaging in a way to sort of cut down on population growth. Demographics is a big thing. I talk about that a lot. People are just not having babies like they used to. And if you're sterilizing kids through this transgender thing, you're getting some of those kids taken out of the system. I might talk a little bit more about this on Sunday. We had this massive funeral. I will say this was, I don't know if it's fair to describe a funeral as spectacular, but this was epic. I've never seen anything like this. Of course, the Queen was loved by many. There are some people who believe she's a Christian. There's some evidence to that. That's a call that I don't get to make. And so the British papers were just full of all of these pictures about Queen Elizabeth and her funeral. And it's pretty clear, though, from the parts that I saw, the gospel was preached at this funeral. So hopefully some people heard that and got saved. Let me talk about this. Okay, this is the red heifers. I sort of joked on Sunday that one of the red heifers, somebody said it looks like their knees were skinned. And I said, well, then that's probably because that red heifer had to sit in coach. But there are 5 red heifers brought from the United States. I think this is a significant end-time related event. We know that there's going to be this temple. We know that this temple will be a tool of deception. There's a lot of push in some quarters in Israel to build the temple. One of the things that they need, or they claim they need, are these a red heifer that meets the standards, the rabbinical standards. It can only have like 2 white hairs or something like that. And then at the age of 2, it's set aside and it'll be sacrificed, I think, a year later. So at least one of these 5 red heifers appears to be what we would call kosher right now. I've been reading people's comments in a lot of different places. There's a lot of people saying, oh, they can't be, they're not kosher because they're GMO, they're genetically modified. And I don't know that they're genetically modified. They've been selectively breeded, but they haven't had anybody go in and try to alter their DNA, which is, I think, what genetic modification requires. So this is part of the process of this temple or place of worship, sacrifice, that type of thing happening. This ashes of the red heifer are necessary to ritually purify these areas. It could be that they will find the ashes of a prior red heifer. I mean, there are archaeological digs that has that as a goal. They think they know, or they have locations that they suspect that the prior red heifer ashes may be buried. I don't know how they would identify them, but I'm not building the temple. The people that are building the temple, they're pushing forward with this, and we know that certainly appears that this holy place, temple, appears to be something that's part of this last period of time. And I would agree, Suzanne says they're not GMO. These are not genetically modified. They might have been selectively breeded, but that's not genetic modification. Go look it up on Wikipedia or a scientific journal. A GMO thing requires like an alteration of the DNA or something else to make it other than a natural breeding. And they do this mostly in seed technology. If you drive around Ohio, you'll see fields that have like corn, a big picture of corn at the end with a number. That's a hybrid seed. That's probably a genetically modified organization. So if they stay, so question, if they stay unblemished, what month next year can they be sacrificed? My understanding is that the one that appears to be kosher right now is about 8 months old. So it would be at least 16 months before it would be identified as, yeah, this is the red heifer that we want and that we're looking for. So then it would be a little bit beyond that. And then there's a lot of talk about, do they have to have the build the temple before they sacrifice the red heifer and get the ashes? And I don't think they have to build the temple. Again, I'm not building the thing. If they're looking for old red heifer ashes, then they could certainly put the red heifer ashes when they sacrifice it and burn it to get to the ashes. They could certainly put those in storage, I would think. So it has to be 2 years. Thank you, Suzanne. It has to be 2 years and 1 day old. Let's see. So I want to get back on track here. So that's a significant thing that's going on. Here is King Abdullah II of Jordan meeting with the acting prime minister of Israel in New York. Everybody's in New York this week, so now I'm having to review all these speeches that these guys drone on about what they want to accomplish. So everybody's in New York speaking, with the exception of Zelensky, who's sending in a video, and Putin, who's not sending in anything as far as I understand, because everybody's paying attention to him anyway. I'll talk about that in just a moment. So Abdullah spoke today or yesterday and said that the Christian sites in Israel were under assault or attack, which I'm not sure what he's talking about. But again, he's there trying to make a political point. And you'll notice whenever he speaks, he always talks about Christian and Muslim holy sites because he considers himself to be the person in charge of that. But he never mentions the Jewish holy sites. I also saw that this year they expect 50,000 above 50,000 Jewish, maybe it was 100,000, 50 to 100,000 Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount. This is an unprecedented number. So that's going to create a lot of tension. I won't play this video, but in connection with the Abraham Accords, which continue to be pushed and talked about all the time, Jared Kushner was interviewed a couple weeks ago, and it's kind of he said, well, either I or my children, I expect them to be immortal. Now, I don't know where he gets that from. I don't know what he's thinking. His office later issued a report and said, well, I think that was in jest. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to play you the video that he did. And let me... Okay, so here's Kushner's video.
And then finally, I think that from the last year, the one thing I've tried to put a priority on since I left the White House was getting some exercise in. I think that there's a good probability that my generation is, hopefully with the advances in science, either the first generation to live forever or the last generation that's going to die. And so we need to keep ourselves in pretty good shape. And then the other thing I like.
So live forever. Yeah, not be immortal, but he or his children will be the first generation to be live forever. And I don't know if that sound came through or not. Again, I'm trying to work. I've got about 5 screens going here to try to get all this done. So Kushner's a guy you need to pay attention to. He has the Abraham Accord Peace Institute. He's gotten significant billions of dollars from the United Arab Emirates and from his friend Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, to invest that in an investment, sort of a hedge fund. And I just think he's a guy you need to pay attention to, particularly because of the Abraham Accords and the significance there. I'm looking at your comments. I find them kind of interesting. So here's a little bit going on. So this the gas field. Just so you remember let me get my little laser pointer here. So, of course, here's the Israel-Lebanon border, and there's a question: is how do you extend that border out? So Israel says we're going to go this line. Lebanon has really been kind of fuzzy. First, they said this line 23 would be the line, and then Israel found this Karish field, and they've started drilling there, and they're supposed to start gas production very soon. And this is Nasrallah making a speech the other day saying we have our rockets trained on this big gas rig. That's a FPSO. You can look up what that means. It's a drilling rig operated by a company called Energean that's leased to Israel. And they're supposed to start, this is the field here. So if this is the line, as you can see, I think it's called the Kana field. That would be shared between Israel and Lebanon. The Karish field, at least by the early Lebanese line and the Israeli line, would not be shared. There was a guy named Hoff who came in and said he was an American. I think he worked under Amos Hochstein, who's currently still involved in the negotiations about this demarcation line, as they call it. He suggested this line. And then when this field, the Karish field, which means shark, was discovered, line 29, Lebanon said, oh, no, wait. Our line really goes here. And I think they've even moved it a little bit further south. And so Nasrallah says, if you drill in this area, there's going to be a war. And we've got our rockets trained on you. They sent some, I think in July, they sent some rockets that way. So Danny Gantz, I'm sorry, I've got there we go. Danny Gantz, I did all that. Never mind. I need a personal assistant, I think, here. Anyway, Danny Gantz, who's the defense minister of Israel, has given a couple speeches recently, and he said, look, if Nasrallah, if you attack the Karish field, Lebanon will pay. Now, I'm not really a big fan of Danny Gantz. Gantz leans left on a lot of issues. Israel will be going to elections in about 5 weeks, I think November 1st. And it's anybody's guess how that's going to go. There are some things that are happening For example, Lapid will be giving a speech at the UN tomorrow. You probably will want to look at that, watch that, or find reports on it. And the reports that I'm reading, Times of Israel and elsewhere, are that Lapid is going to say for the first time by an Israeli prime minister anywhere, but at the UN especially, he's going to say that Israel will accept a two-state solution. Now, understand, the two-state solution that they talk about is not really a two-state solution, because if you go back to the San Remo Treaty back in 1920, 22, it was supposed to be a two-state solution. Israel and Jordan. Everything west of the Jordan River, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, was to be Israel, and the Arab state was to be Transjordan, east of the Jordan River. And there was actually international agreement to put that in place. That's the only time there's ever been international agreement as to how the land was supposed to be governed. That agreement, in my opinion, still exists. There's a French lawyer, I cannot remember his name. He did a book, a lot of research on it, and it was very compelling. And I agree with his conclusion that was the only time the international community agreed on how this was supposed to be divided for governing purposes. So that would be a two-state solution. But now they come in and they have Gaza. Gaza was given over to the Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, in 2005, just a couple days before we had the Katrina hurricane hit the United States. And I think there's a connection there. I think there's a very direct connection. We forced Israel to give up that land. Ariel Sharon went along with it. 10,000 Jews were evacuated from Gaza. Their farms were given over. The Palestinians came in and destroyed the farms. They had they had greenhouses, hydroponic farming, and all sorts of things. This was a major agricultural producing region, and they came in and destroyed it because it had been used by Jews, and they didn't want any part of it. So you have Transjordan, you have Jordan, you have Gaza, and then you have the West Bank. So really what you're talking about is you're not talking about a two-state solution. You're talking about a 3 or 4 state solution, because Israel would be one of the states. So when Lapid talks about and says a two-state solution, it's just a bunch of hot air coming out of his mouth. But understand, I've talked to you about this over the past month a lot, that there has been this Saudi proposal. Hasn't been formalized yet, but it's been talked about in the Saudi press. It's been talked about in some quarters of the Israeli press, and it was also in the U.S. press in the Wall Street Journal back in June, about a thing called the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine, and it would be governed by Jordan. And it does seem to track what the Trump plan had. So understand, Lapid's going to push this. This is another one of these things that's unprecedented, and I would put this into the term of yet another thing that's converging. So Gantz has given a speech recently saying, listen, if Hezbollah, if you're going to go after our gas fields, we are going to come after you. And I have a rather long video of his that I think I'll play it on Sunday, where he gave a talk at the Jerusalem Post conference a week ago. In fact, let me do this. Let me just play a little bit of that speech right now. It is... Hang on. Here it is. Here's Gantz at the Jerusalem Post conference a week ago today.
In today's globalized world, every shift has a multiplying effect. When we see the war in Ukraine, which we all hope that will come to an end soon, when we see it threatening global energy prices, food resources, cost of living, we conclude that the security and stability in the Middle East are more critical than ever, yet they are not guaranteed. As you can see, our region is divided by an axis. It reflects the geographic split between areas of radicalism and progress. It also reflects the symbolic split between the trend of peace, which we celebrate this week as we mark 2 years into the Abraham Accords, versus the trend of radicalization led by Iran. Taking cue from Robert Frost today,
So I'm going to
And then finally, I think that from
hang on. So let me go back to my screens here. Okay, so I'll play more of that on Sunday. He really talks about Iran and how they're going to deal with Iran. And like I said, though I'm no friend of Danny or no fan of Danny Gantz, but he did speak at the it was the 21st World Summit on Counterterrorism last week at Reichman University. He is the defense minister of Israel, at least until the election on November 1st. He, I think, would like to be prime minister, and he was asked a question at this conference about, hey, what do you think about, would you sit in a government with Netanyahu? And he was, I think, sort of diplomatic the way he answered it. He said, we should thank Mr. Netanyahu for his service to the nation for many years, and now it's maybe time for him to go home and to retire from public life. So he would not really sit in that government with Netanyahu. So but the negotiations over this gas field continue to be a big deal, and I see my thing wasn't necessarily shared, but this is the area of dispute where these different lines are. This is the field right now where Nasrallah in the speech a week ago was saying we have our rockets trained on this. This is Al Akbar. This is a Lebanese newspaper. It's a mouthpiece for Hezbollah. And here's a picture of Amos Hochstein, who works for the U.S. State Department, who's been the main guy negotiating on this gas field and the lines of demarcation. He was also the guy who sort of came out last December and said, hey, we're not going to we're withdrawing any support for a pipeline from the Israeli fields to Europe. So now there's only two ways that Israel could really effectively get its gas to Europe. They can build LNG facilities here, which will take a couple of years. They can ship the gas by pipeline down to LNG facilities in Egypt, which they are currently doing, where the gas is liquefied and then put in container ships and taken to Europe, and then it's regasified. But Egypt does not have that big a capacity. The other thing would be to build a pipeline straight north up through the Syrian waters to Turkey, and building them through the Syrian waters when Israel and Syria are effectively at war right now. That's probably not going to happen. But Turkey has come in and said, hey, we'll allow you to build a pipeline all the way up through to connect to our pipelines, and we can ship everything to Europe. And of course, we'll get our transit fees, tax the gas that comes through, and Turkey would like to do that because they're in severe economic distress. But it appears that at least with a Lapid Gantz government, and this is, I think, a concern that this is going to happen before November 1st, that there's going to be some kind of compromise reached with the Lebanese government, which means they're going to compromise with Hezbollah, which means they're going to compromise with Iran. And the way that Hochstein seems to be leaning right now is that there will be some kind of accommodation where Hezbollah will get part of the revenue, and maybe even part of the revenue from the Karish field, although they haven't really released the details. So understand that this is a big deal, the way that this is going. The other thing that happened last week, I talked a little bit about it on Sunday, was this Shanghai Cooperative Organization that met in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. It's about a 7 or 8 nation alliance. That's kind of an interesting number. India, China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. I'm not sure if Pakistan is part of it, but it appears that Iran was brought in as a full member. They would have been the 8th member of the organization, and Turkey's now been granted observer status with a goal towards having Turkey join into the alliance. And so this is the Tehran Times from today. President Trump, they called it the axis of evil. Now they're calling it the anti-evil axis. And so we're moving into a multipolar world. It's not a world order that's led mainly by the United States now. It's splitting apart. And I think that has prophetic significance. So let me just say this. I don't want to talk too much about this. Whenever I talk about Russia and Putin and what's going on, I always get a lot of grief from people about I don't understand what's going on and that sort of thing. So I'm going to just tell you I've read a lot about this. So Putin comes out today, and he essentially made a threat of nuclear war. He wants there's 2 regions, the Luhansk and Donetsk, or sometimes called the Donbass regions of eastern Ukraine. They claim that these are Russian, largely ethnic Russian. There's been a lot of back and forth. There's been a lot of killing going both ways in these regions for many years now. And Putin didn't like that. He felt that needed to be under control. And that was at least one of his main stated goals when he invaded Ukraine back on February 24th of this year. The war, I don't think, has gone as well as Russia would have liked. They've lost a lot of people. Ukraine's lost a lot of people. Millions and millions and millions of people have left Ukraine. The Russian method of war is that they just go in and they just completely obliterate places so that the people who used to live there have to move someplace else. This is what happened in Syria. As one of the NATO commanders said, it looks like they went in there and their goal was to get people on the move, to make them move someplace else and become someone else's problems. That's what they did in Syria. By my evaluation of it, this is what they were doing in Ukraine. Ukraine has made some gains recently, offensive gains, but the question is, how long can they sustain those? Russia has come out, and Putin came out today and said, I'm not bluffing. I consider this a threat. He has mobilized his army reserves. My understanding is he has put in place a restriction on any male 18 to 65 from leaving Russia. They've had some protests in Russia. People are not happy about this. There's opposition growing to Putin, but he has his goal in mind. But there was at least a veiled threat of nuclear war of some kind if there was opposition to what Putin wants to accomplish in Ukraine. And while his army may not be as strong as everybody thought it was, he does have very sophisticated nuclear weapons and submarines, which can make everything very difficult. And I would be remiss if I did not say that by some measures, the world is on the verge of nuclear war. That is a fact. Whether it will happen or not, I don't know. I've seen Russian diplomats. There was a BBC interview today with the Russian ambassador, and he said, well, I don't think Putin would use nukes. But The way Putin said that, I'm not bluffing, it appears that he is leaving that option open. That's a very significant thing. Now, I'll close with this, just a little bit about Alexander Dugin. This is the background picture on Alexander Dugin's website. And who is Alexander Dugin? Alexander Dugin, back in 2015, Foreign Affairs, published by the Council on Foreign Relations, published a big article, Putin's Brain, and it referred to this guy named Alexander Dugin. In fact, there's Alexander Dugin. This is an article that he published on September 16th. That would have been last Friday, and it was on the brink of World War III. He is a Russian nationalist. He is Russian Orthodox. He thinks the West is decadent and needs to be defeated, and that the only way Russia needs to just go in and annihilate places that have these liberal values, as he refers to them. And so he wrote this article on the brink of World War III. It is, it's a little bit dark. At the end of August, he was at a function with his daughter, who was also a well-known journalist, commentator in Russia. She got in his car to drive away, and it exploded, and she was killed. A lot of people think that he was the one who was the target. He's about 60 years old, I believe, 58 or 60 years old. There's also a lot of things that I read about Putin and he have never met. They're not that close. Putin doesn't really follow him. And there was some suggestion that Putin was the one who tried to assassinate him. But given the way that Putin's assassinations usually go, if he's coming for you, he's going to get you, and it's not going to be a big bloody car explosion. So it's up in the air as to who exactly tried to take out Dugin a few weeks ago. But Dugin is a committed philosopher. He was fired from Moscow State University back in 2014. And so some people think if he was really a good friend, close confidant of Putin, that would not have happened unless Putin signed off on it. So whether he is Putin's brain or not is something that's up in the air, but he does have some influence within the very strong nationalist leaning parties in Russia. He has been critical of the way that the war has gone thus far. So today he issued another article, published this on his blog, called Putin's Fateful Speech is Being Prepared, 3 Scenarios. And the 3 scenarios that he has, let me pull up my copy of the article here so I can read those to you. Three scenarios. So look, this is kind of dark. The first is a catastrophic scenario for Russia: occupation, de-imperialization, the end of Russia. And so that's the worst case scenario in his mind, that this invasion and the threats that Putin has made today and the calling up of the reserves, and we're going to do a big offensive move into Ukraine to take back this territory. We're going to have a referendum next week over 4 or 5 days for the Donbass and the Luhansk regions of Ukraine. They're going to get to vote on whether they want to be part of Russia. And so once they become part of Russia, then if they're attacked, Russia will say that is an attack on us. Belarus, they're already having defensive meetings with Lukashenko, the head of Belarus, which has a treaty with Russia similar to the NATO treaty, that if Russia is attacked, Belarus will help with troops and hardware and men and all these sorts of things. So those plans are being made. The president of Belarus has been meeting with defense people in Russia as we just over the last couple of days. So Dugin's article. So the first scenario is catastrophic scenario. Russia loses and it's the end of Russia. Then his second scenario is this: apocalyptic scenario for everyone, the end of history, the destruction of humanity. This is dark stuff, but you need to put this into the context of the times that we live in. He says this: things could start right now. If the bombing of the nuclear power plant achieved its objective, this would be equivalent to a targeted nuclear attack on Russian territory. The response would no longer come from Ukraine, but from the real decision-making center, which is much further west. He does not like the U.S. and the EU and NATO and all those sorts of things. However, Russia could resort to nuclear weapons in other situations, since for Russia, both state and people, losing a war would mean total annihilation and not just a severe but still tolerable defeat, which could be overcome. The nuclear scenario cannot be discarded. The West clearly underestimates this probability, considering it a bluff. And you can see one of the articles that I had for you was that the scenario, I think it came from the Financial Times, that Putin raises the stakes. Oh, and the West just shrugs it off. That was a couple slides back. So he actually has two other scenarios, one of which is the status quo as an empty and meaningless illusion. Now all that remains is a direction that exists as a subjective position, but is not based on any objective reality because it simply does not exist. This is the mental state of the party of the status quo or collective. It is the category of those high-level officials and businessmen who, for reasons no one knows, continue to believe that the world before 24 February 2022 and the world after 24 February 2022 are essentially the same thing. Nothing, neither reports from the front nor terrorist acts on the home front nor ongoing tectonic changes of the world order seems to convince them otherwise. There's some things he says that he's a philosopher, he's a deep thinker, and he is a commentator on geopolitics. Okay, so that's a status quo. So you have end of Russia, you have apocalyptic scenario, the end of humanity, destruction of humanity. And then he has yet another scenario, which is this: a patriotically victorious scenario for Russia and the supporters of a multipolar world, the Holy War. The third scenario is the most important and the only one that is saved. So this is kind of interesting that all of this is happening now at this time. So let me make just one comment, and I'll finish with this, and I'll take a couple questions. I mentioned on Sunday that there was a German the head of the Christian Democratic Party, the minority party, gave a speech, and he said, you are going to remember what it was like on September on 24. You're going to remember where you were on September 24th. I want to pull up, I have a transcript of this. Now, so there's been just a tremendous amount of okay, let me put this over here. I don't know if you can see this. Oops, not wrong screen, sorry. Okay, so this is a transcript of his speech. It's not, let me increase the font size here. Okay, so this is German. So this is the transcript of the speech. And so everybody got all excited because he said, you're going to remember where you were on the 24th of, he said September 2022. You're going to remember where you were when that happened. So I've been sent all kinds of questions about it. What did he mean? What did he mean? Because it's September 21st, and if it's September 24th, what did he mean? What he was talking about? So I researched it. I'm just going to tell you what I found. So I went back and I found the original video. The original video was done. It was a speech that he gave in the German Bundestag, the parliament legislature, on February 27th, 2022. You can find the speech online. A lot of people have clipped this out and they said, look, he's talking about September 24th. And the only thing I can think of is if you translate the first part of this, excuse me one second. If you translate the first part of this, he talks about the war starting in Ukraine, which was 3 days before he spoke on February 27th. February 24th was the start of the war in Ukraine. So I don't know what he meant. It's clear he doesn't say what he meant. I think one way of interpreting this is that he misspoke and he meant to say you're going to remember where you were on February 24th. But it's clear he did say September of 2022, September 24, 2022. But it could be that he misspoke. But he didn't give any specifics as to why you're going to remember it or what information that he had. But it was done in the context of him talking about the start of the Ukraine war. And you're going to remember where you were on February 24th, 2022, because it is a very significant date. And I just gave you some articles, a blog post from Alexander Dugin, where he says, you know, the leaders of the world refuse to recognize the significance of February 24th. So it's very possible that he misspoke. So I guess we wait till 3 days. We'll know whether there was something significant. It does seem that everybody is very amped up. I mean, I'm seeing all kinds of the rapture is going to happen this weekend. It's going to happen in a couple days. It's happening any moment, and that sort of thing. Folks, I don't know when the rapture is going to happen. Okay, and here's a news flash. You don't either. So we have an obligation of things we're supposed to do until the Lord comes and gets us. Yeah, it'd be great to have the rapture. I look forward to that day, but I personally am of the view that we're going to be around here and see a lot more things before it's time for the Lord to come in. Part of that is because we are going to be witnesses for the Lord in this world at a very difficult time. We're going to minister to people. We're going to witness to people. And so I just happen to think that we're going to be here for a while. If I'm wrong in that, I hope I'm wrong and we're out of here sooner. But I'm just telling you is everybody that I know that believes in the rapture and is premillennial, to a person, almost all of them are saying, I did not think we would be around here to see the things that we're seeing. So here's the deal. We are around here to see the things that we're seeing. And I think we're going to see more. And I can go into this in a lot of detail on another occasion. I'm just saying is we have a job, we have responsibilities, we have obligations of things that we need to do. And we need to be about the Lord's business. We need to be paying attention to all of this. But, a friend of mine sent me an email just a little while ago from South Africa. And in South Africa, they have like 50 municipalities that are on the verge of total economic collapse and bankruptcy right now. That's South Africa. This stuff is happening all over the world. So we need to be about the Lord's business in this time. And it's really time to be warning people about, look, Alexander Dugin, I don't know his status. He claims to be an Russian Orthodox, but I have issues with Russian Orthodox Church. But so he'll on his blog here, he talks about being baptized by his grandmother or great grandmother in the church when he was a child. So I don't know what his religious status is, but I'm just telling you here's a guy who's a pretty deep thinker, very pro-Russian, but he's writing about the fact that there are three scenarios here, and two of them are apocalyptic as to how this thing in Ukraine is going to go. So I would suggest that maybe you go read Daniel chapter 7 and see if some of this stuff fits into that. And I'll take a few questions. So, I'm going to check my messenger to see if there are any questions there. I'm told to read the chat for questions. Okay. So look, I think I answered the question on the 24th, and then there's questions about the 27th. And Rosh Hashanah is coming up. Feast of Trumpets, and a lot of people think the rapture happens on the Feast of Trumpets. And I've seen videos out there. They're out there saying that this is the. I know I've said this in the past. The person will say, but this definitely is the Feast of Trumpets. And then I've seen videos put up like King Charles III, he is the Antichrist, and he's now being revealed as the Antichrist. So I think we need to be, the Lord gave us rational minds. We need to just be careful and not jump to too many conclusions. Somebody, and I think they were well-meaning when they sent this to me, they sent me a clip of Queen Elizabeth's funeral. And this shows how people can misspeak when they're speaking publicly. So the hearse is going down through the crowds, and he's talking about the fact that she's going to, she either has lied, Liz Truss is going to be going into Westminster Hall and becoming prime minister, and then he says, where Queen Elizabeth has lied in state for the last 4 years. And so everybody says, oh, so she's really been dead for 4 years, and King Charles has been in charge for all. And I just think the guy misspoke. She had lied in state there for 4 days, and he said 4 years. People misspeak sometimes when they're speaking publicly and they don't have a script. I do it. Everybody does it. And I think sometimes we kind of blow things up a little bit too much. That's just my opinion. So, somebody asked, did PM get her taste and smell back? Well, she has taste and smell. It's just all screwed up. So you can continue to pray for her. We're trying different things to get this done. So, let's see. It's hard for me to go back. Yeah, I don't think, Lloyd, the answer to your question is, I don't think Lapid says that they're ready to announce a two-state solution. I think he says that he will accept a two-state solution. I think that's the question. Question, Benita. Let's see. When will all the monies are back to the Vatican? Will the Pope have trillions at his disposal and be the one Prince Charles spoke of? I personally do not think that the Vatican Bank will have that much money. Now, that's separate apart from the assets that the Vatican has. The Vatican Bank has about $5 or $6 billion in assets. It's not that large of a bank. So even if they drag in a lot of these other Vatican organizations, I don't think they're going to swell to the trillions of dollars that Prince Charles had mentioned when he spoke about with trillions at his disposal. I don't know. I'm just saying I researched the Vatican Bank. I looked up their financials. They have about $5 or $6 billion in assets. To give you some idea as to how that compares, the largest banks in the United States, Wells Fargo, and then I think Chase is the largest, have assets that are close to $4 trillion each. So the Vatican Bank is very, very small compared to that. So I'm not sure that, I don't know what's going on there. I'm well, I guess time will tell whether it's significant or not. Let's see. Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know if Biden is in the state of Delaware. I think he's in another state right now. It's not a good state. So, let's see. Question. Why is Walmart and other big store chains canceling billions of dollars in inventory? Very good question, Tammy. Listen, people aren't spending money. I think they're looking at their utility bills. They're looking at if they have an adjustable rate mortgage. I've heard that some of those adjustable rate mortgages, people will be paying $800 to $1,000 a month or more than they are currently, as those are adjusted. So Walmart and Target, they're canceling billions of dollars of orders. Usually those are for things that are for discretionary spending because, I mean, people are making a decision. In the UK, they did many interviews over the past month in the newspapers and on the BBC with parents who were saying, I'm trying to decide if I pay my utility bill or feed my kid. This is a very it's a very dystopian world that we live in right now. Things are changing very, very rapidly. So again, we have to be in the Word, prayed up, worded up, if you will, armor of God, all of that stuff. We have a very important task to do in a world like this. And then I'll do one more. Let's see. Question. Well, the problem with the comments is they scroll too fast, so I can't get to them. So anyway, we have an important task to do, and I think we need to be in the Word, put on the armor of God, and do the things that we are to do. I just saw a comment. Somebody says, I don't remember normal anymore. Listen, we'll soon long for the days of 2021 or 2020, let alone 2019. Things have changed dramatically. And this is the world. So, but we know how this works out for us that are believers. And if you're not a believer, you need to come to faith in Jesus Christ, like right now. It's time. So anyway, thanks for listening. I'm going to end the broadcast now. Sunday, I'm going to do my update at 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time. We have a special speaker. First hour, we're going to do a time of remembrance of Pastor Steve Mitchell. It'll be the second anniversary of his death. So I'm going to do my update at 7:45 a.m. the next two Sundays because of other things that we have going on at FBC. I'll try to do a midweek. I'm doing an interview tomorrow with Pablo at Serpents and Doves, but he sometimes edits them, so I don't know when it'll put up. I might be able to convince him to do it live. That'll be at, I think, 4 o'clock Eastern. So you might see that. And then next Wednesday, a week from today, Tom Hughes and I just confirmed it today at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific on September 28th. Tom and I will be interviewing General Amir Avivi of the IDSF, the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, And we'll be talking about some of these issues: Hezbollah, Iran. The situation in the West Bank is really deteriorating with terrorist attacks and armed insurgents and that type of thing. And that was General Avivi's expertise. So we'll talk to him about that. So that'll be September 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. That's the plan right now. Tom Hughes and I will be interviewing General Avivi, and it may be streamed on FBC. It certainly will be streamed live on Hope for Our Times YouTube channel. I'll try to do a simultaneous stream. If not, I'll put it up on FBC after it's over. So you can certainly go to Hope for Our Times, which is 412 Churches, Tom Hughes YouTube channel, and get it live there for sure, maybe on FBC. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk later. Thank you.